All right, today we're going to do a deep forensic dive into one of the most foundational stories in the entire Quran, the narrative of the very first act of disobedience. We're going to use a detailed analysis of Surah Al-Aʿrāf to really unpack the rebellion of Iblis, the precise nature of his sin, and the divine judgment that came right after. And look, this is so much more than just a story. It's a profound exploration of obedience, arrogance, and justice that really sets the stage for, well, for everything that follows in the human story. Let's get right into it. So our whole analysis kicks off right here with verse 11 of Surah Al-Aʿrāf. This one sentence is packed with so much meaning. First, you get the confirmation of our creation. We have certainly created you and given you form. Then, bam, a divine command goes out to all the angels. And finally, you see this incredibly stark contrast. Total obedience from the angels, immediately followed by this one singular, universe-altering refusal from one being, Iblis. This right here, this is the moment it all begins. So, to really get a handle on this story, we're going to approach it systematically. First, we'll look at the command to prostrate. What did it really mean? Then, we'll deconstruct Iblis's justification for saying no, getting right to the core of his logic. After that, we'll do a fascinating cross-verse analysis, seeing how this story is told in other parts of the Quran to pick up on all the nuances. From there, we'll get into the divine judgment and its consequences, and then we'll wrap it all up by pulling together the key lessons this story holds for us. Okay, let's start with the command itself. God has just created Adam, given humanity its form, and then he issues this decree to the entire angelic assembly. The command is crystal clear: prostrate to Adam. It sounds simple enough, but the weight of this command is just immense. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. What does sajda, or prostration, mean here? The source Tafsir is very clear on this. This was not an act of worship. Worship is for God alone, period. This was what's known as a sajda takrimiya, a prostration of honor, of respect. You see, it was really a test of obedience. God commanded it so the angels would acknowledge the special status and honor that he, the Creator, had just given to this new being, Adam. And you have to remember, this command went out to all the angels, no exceptions. They all immediately prostrated, showing their complete submission to God's will. So Iblis's refusal, it wasn't just some private disagreement. It was a public, defiant act that ripped him away from the entire community of the obedient. In that single moment, he chose to stand completely alone, isolated by his own pride. And that makes his rebellion so much more powerful. All right, so we've seen the command, now comes the refusal. And this, right here, is where the core conflict just blows wide open. In this next part, we're going to focus on the direct showdown that happens next, and the so-called logic that Iblis uses to justify his disobedience. So what happens next is a direct confrontation. And notice, God doesn't just punish. He asks a question. And it's such a precise and powerful question: what prevented you? In Arabic, it's ma mana'aka. This isn't just, hey, why didn't you do it? No, it's so much deeper. It's asking about the internal barrier, the spiritual sickness, the roadblock inside of Iblis himself that stopped him from obeying a direct command from his Creator. And here it is, the infamous reply: Ana khayrun minhu. I am better than him. There's no apology, no confusion, no asking for forgiveness. He just fires back with a justification, an argument based entirely on where he came from. He lays out his case: I'm made of fire and you made him from clay. So let's break down this flawed logic, this chaos that he's using. In his mind, it's a no-brainer. Fire is just better. It's light, it's powerful, it moves upward. Clay, on the other hand, is dark, heavy, lowly. But this is a complete and total misunderstanding of what has real value. The analysis points out that sure, fire has a kind of light, but it's a restless, chaotic light that doesn't have any divine guidance. Clay, even though it's humble and from the earth, has this incredible potential to receive the ruh, the divine spirit breathed into it by God. Iblis's logic was totally self-centered, and it made him blind to the real source of honor, which isn't the material you're made from, but the will of the one who made you. And this brings us right to the heart of the matter, the technical term for his sin. It wasn't just disobedience, it was kibr, or arrogance. The source analysis uses a very specific word, istikbar. This is that spiritual disease of seeing yourself as better than everyone else, which always, always leads to rejecting the truth, especially when that truth doesn't line up with how great you think you are. This wasn't a debate. It was just pure, raw pride. Okay, now we're going to do something that is just so central to any deep textual analysis. This story of Iblis is so important that it actually shows up in several different chapters, or surahs, in the Qur'an. And guess what? Each time it's told, the wording is slightly different, and those little differences are incredibly revealing. By putting them side by side, we get this amazing multidimensional view of what actually happened. This is so fascinating. Look at the table. Here in Al-Aʿrāf, the verse says he was not of those who prostrated, which hints that maybe his inner nature had already separated him from the group of the obedient. But then you look at Surah Al-Baqarah and it's more blunt. He refused and was arrogant, explicitly connecting the action to the pride. Then it gets even deeper in Surah Sa'd, where God asks him essentially, did this arrogance just pop up now, or were you always like this? And in Al-Hijr Al-Asra, his refusal isn't even a statement. It's this scornful rhetorical question that's just dripping with contempt. Each version adds another layer to our understanding of this first rebel. And it's not just his refusal. Even the way God questions him changes. As we saw in Al-Aṛāf and Sa'd, the question is all about that internal barrier. What prevented you? But in other places, like in Al-Hijr, the story just jumps straight from the command to Iblis's justification, completely skipping the question. The analysis suggests this is all deliberate. It's meant to show us different angles of the same event. Sometimes the focus is on Iblis's inner spiritual sickness, and other times it's on the sheer, jaw-dropping nerve of his public defiance. So, Iblis has made his case. He has offered his justification. And now, the judgment. There's no more debate. We now turn to verse 13, where God delivers his immediate, clear, and final response to this first act of arrogance. Just listen to that verdict. It is swift, and it is severe. And notice how it calls out the root sin directly, takabbur, arrogance. The reason for his expulsion is laid out right there, descend, because it is not for you to be arrogant within it. This establishes a fundamental spiritual rule. A place of honor and the presence of arrogance simply cannot coexist. And this shows us such a key principle of divine justice, right? The punishment is a perfect reflection of the crime. Paradise, or that high spiritual station he fell from, is a place of peace, of humility, of submission. Arrogance, then, is like a spiritual poison, a contaminant that just doesn't belong there. So the expulsion isn't just about punishment. It's a necessary cleansing of that sacred space. The arrogant one simply had to go. Now, let's really zoom in and meticulously break down this single verse of judgment, because it's not just one punishment. The source analysis shows that this one sentence actually has 4 separate and escalating parts to it, each one building on the last. Let's walk through these 4 components. First, you get the command fakhruj, descend. This is a fall, not just from a physical place, but from a high spiritual rank. Second, the reason is spelled out, establishing that universal rule, no arrogance allowed here. Third, the command gets even stronger with fakhruj, get out. This is a direct, forceful banishment. And finally, his new permanent identity is stamped upon him. Innaka minas saghirin. Indeed, you are of the debased. Let's just pause on that final, devastating term for a second. Al-sagirin. This doesn't just mean humbled. It means to be made low, worthless, contemptible, utterly humiliated. And just think about that. His entire argument, his whole rebellion was based on one phrase, Ana khayrun minhu, I am better than him. The divine judgment takes that claim, shatters it, and seals his fate with its perfect, devastating opposite. He who claimed to be superior is now, forever, among the most debased. So, after digging through the command, the refusal, the flawed logic, and the final judgment, what's the big picture? What are we supposed to take away from all of this? This final section is all about pulling together the core principles that this foundational story teaches us. Well, the analysis gives us several profound takeaways. First and foremost, the original sin, the root of all rebellion against God, wasn't lust or greed. It was kibr, arrogance. Second, it's a huge warning against trusting our own subjective, flawed logic over a clear command from God, a real path to ruin. Third, it teaches us that real honor isn't found in thinking you're great, but in humbly submitting to the one who is truly great. Fourth, we see that divine justice isn't random. The consequences perfectly fit the crime. And finally, this whole story sets up the ultimate test for humanity. Will we follow the path of Iblis's stubborn pride, or the path of Adam's eventual humility and repentance? When you boil it all down, what this story really does is establish a fundamental choice, a spiritual crossroads that every single one of us faces in our lives. It's the choice between two opposite ways of being. You've got the path of Iblis on one side, which is all about arrogance, me-first logic, and defiance. And on the other side, you have the path of Adam, which, yeah, it involves a mistake, but it's ultimately defined by humility, recognizing that mistake, and turning back to God. And that leaves us with one final question to really think about. Because this isn't just some ancient story about angels and demons, it's a living blueprint for the spiritual battle that happens inside the human heart every single day. So the question for all of us is this: how does this foundational story of arrogance versus humility show up in our own lives, in our own struggles, and in the choices we make today?